Joining me right now is Seth Mandel. Seth Mandel with the New York Post, where he is the op-ed editor. He's also a alumnist over there at Commentary Magazine. He joins us right now on the Old National Bank Newsmaker hotline. And we start with this, I'm not opposed to recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, if only because I'm fully aware and always have been my life long that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. But what is the gain for the United States diplomatically or maybe some other way in making this recognition today?
We're going to have to wait. I think we're going to have to wait and see. I'm not sure that that's entirely clear why right now, but my sense is that this is part of a larger realignment you're seeing, of course, across the Middle East. You're seeing Sunni Arab states increasingly comfortable with their behind-the-scenes alliance with Israel to form an anti-Iran front. And that became much more serious with two things, with the war in Syria, because the Iranians have essentially been running a large part of the war. I mean, the Russians have been there too, but Assad depended greatly on the Iranians and Hezbollah and the Iran nuclear deal, Obama's deal with Iran, and that sort of legitimated the program and freed up all this cash for Iran to continue making all this trouble across the Middle East. And so those two things pushed especially the Saudis, but also for sure the Egyptians, closer to Israel. And at the time that this was happening, they didn't have a president who would embrace this realignment. In fact, the opposite. So now they have a president who openly embraces this realignment, and it's in fact exactly what Trump wants in anti-Iran front. And so my sense is that this is happening now because the pieces are in place.
And part of that, it comes from Benjamin Netanyahu himself. He spoke at the Saban Forum, I think I'm pronouncing it right, Saban Forum, just this past weekend. And one of the things he said, which I think took a lot of people by surprise and maybe left them scratching their heads, is that there are a lot of Arab nations that would like to be friends with Israel. The people there recognize the power and the fortitude of Israel, that they've managed to secure a place for themselves and see that as an opportunity. And when you talk about the Sunni-Shia divide, you see the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, in Saudi Arabia making these reforming kind of moves. So when you talk about, Seth, the idea of a reorganization or reshuffling of the players and the possible partnerships, as strange as they may be, that can arise, the commentary from the Prime Minister of Israel and the movement from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia give that a lot of credibility.
Sure. And I obviously there are plenty of outstanding questions about what MBS is going to be doing in Saudi Arabia. And how happy we should be about all this. I mean, that's a complex subject that I don't think the Trump administration is trying to signal that the Saudis are getting carte blanche for everything, for the purge and for everything else. But on the issue of the anti-Iran front, that is where they're trying to signal that they do want to embrace this and they want this to happen. And you talk about Netanyahu, he's been around for a very long time. Obviously, he's not just been prime minister for a long time now, but he was prime minister. He became prime minister in 1996 during the Clinton administration, Clinton's second term. And back then, he was an outsider who had been an Israeli diplomatic official in Washington, and his perfect English and stage presence and love for the camera had made him kind of a star in defending Israel here in the States and to media. And when he came back to Israel and he ran for prime minister, he came from the outside, and when he became prime minister, people tried to figure out what exactly does this guy believe. And he sat down for interviews, and one of them was with Haaretz back in the day. This was either 96 or 97, but soon after he became prime minister. And they asked him, what do you have against the new Middle East? Right? I mean, Netanyahu was a skeptic of the Oslo process, but not an opponent of it. But this was right after Oslo and right after Yitzhak Rabin's assassination. And people said, there's going to be a new Middle East. Shimon Peres wants a new Middle East. So what do you have against this new Middle East where people get along and make peace? And his response was that people only say there's a new Middle East, but all the underlying conditions remain the same. And that in that 20 years since that interview, Netanyahu has been saying this repeatedly to anybody who will listen. We keep hearing about the new Middle East, but it doesn't actually turn into a new Middle East in which people want peace and can deal openly with Israel's existence. And the Arab Spring brought some hope for some people, but it obviously did not change those underlying conditions. This, 21 years after Bibi first became prime minister, this is the new Middle East actually emerging. And we'll see what it means for everybody involved. There's a lot of outstanding questions, and it's very young. But from Netanyahu's perspective, you have to remember that he's been fending off questions about the new Middle East for 21 years, and now he finally sees it.
Talking to Seth Mandel, op-ed editor at the New York Post. Seth A. Mandel on Twitter on the Old National Bank Newsmaker hotline. The world reaction. You've got nations, Russia, Germany, the UK, France opposed to this. And then, of course, you've got the regular players, including supposedly Saudi Arabia, but Pakistan and Syria and the rest being opposed to this. You have the Palestinians announcing that they're going to start 3 days of rage because of this. So there are two questions. Number one, you also have Erdogan, the president of Turkey, I should say. He's going to be gathering that Islamic organizing group, that IOC group, to talk about what they should do about this. So here is the question. I think the key one. What kind of response could the United States see? Is it economic or is it something else? And is anybody going to notice that the Palestinians' response to something like this is immediately go to 3 days of rage? And have we determined what rage is?
Well, yeah, I think that what they're going to notice is that people are already egging them on and expecting a certain level of violence and rage that may very well not materialize. I'm not convinced that the Palestinians, this new Middle East we're talking about is something the Palestinians recognize also. Now, they may not be happy about it, about all elements of it, but the Saudis summoned Mahmoud Abbas to Riyadh a while ago, a month ago, weeks, whatever it was, and when all the changes were happening in Saudi Arabia, and there were reports that the Saudis were MBS was basically telling Abbas, look, here's how we're going to proceed from here on out. And Abbas was clearly grumpy about the whole thing, and he obviously didn't like what he heard. But he was basically, called out and said, this is the way things are going to work now in the Middle East, and we're telling you, we're not asking you. And all signs point to the fact that Abbas probably knew about the Jerusalem recognition for quite some time, as did obviously the Saudis and the Egyptians, without whom none of this would have ever happened. I mean, there's close coordination here. And the Palestinians, there's always close coordination between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Back channel talks, the security networks, they have to be constantly talking to each other, not just in the West Bank where they share responsibility for security, but anywhere, especially in Jerusalem. So all this is not coming as a great surprise. And I don't think it's very helpful for people to immediately say, oh, but the Palestinians will riot, there will be an intifada. Maybe there will, maybe there won't, but you can't make policy based on the heckler's veto. You can't say this is the right thing to do, but we're not going to do it because the Palestinians will be angry and violent. But I also think that people are underestimating the Palestinians here, their sense of understanding of the regional changes. And I also think that people are overestimating the Palestinians' sense of how important Jerusalem recognition on its own really is in light of all the other challenges they're facing and all the other changes in the region. So I think that people are just making guesses based on history, and that's all perfectly fine. That's something to go on when you make these predictions. But I think that we're actually, for the first time in a long time, seeing essentially a new Middle East, and I'm not sure anybody really knows exactly how it's all going to play out.
Seth Mandel, op-ed editor for the New York Post. On Twitter, Seth, the letter A, Seth A. Mandel on the Old National Bank Newsmaker hotline. Seth, I appreciate you. I'm Tony Katz.